Pasuk teaches us, Vayigarish et ha'adam, the time that Adam Harishon was going to be exiled from Gan Eden. The Torah says, Vayigarish et ha'adam, the human being was expelled from paradise. Asked the Baal Shem Tov, who exactly expelled Adam Harishon from paradise? It's true, obviously, God told him he had no business staying there, but it is also equally true that it does not describe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu picked him up and threw him out. It doesn't say there was a door that he walked through. What does it mean that he was chased out? Explain the Baal Shem Tov. The Aramaic translation of this phrase from the Pasuk is Vayigarish et Adam, Vitarid Yat Adam. Vitarid Yat Adam, in translation, Vitarid means that Adam Harishon became tarud. He became burdened, laden. Explain the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, how did Adam Harishon leave the Garden of Eden? Because he was in a state of tirda. He was unable to right the ship. He could no longer focus on anything except for obsessing about how terrible things were for him, now that his eyes had been opened to see a world filled with objects that were beyond his reach. The idea, says the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, that the springtime of his life, together with Chava Eim Kol Chai, having sinned in the Garden of Eden, was now over and wrecked, was bound up with the idea that now they could no longer look at the world in a pristine manner, and instead, tirda took over. A person who lives in a state of tumult and cannot find any way to right themselves emotionally soon finds themselves chased away from paradise. Moshe and Aaron come to Paro in Parshat Shmot last week. It's last week's news. And they bring the news to Paro, the bad news for him, the good news for us. Shlach et amiv yavduni bamidbar. Here, the Jewish people are meant to leave, and they're going to be redeemed. But of course, the plan goes to rage and ruin. Instead, the life for the Jewish people is much worse off how it had been prior to Moshe and Aaron arriving. And indeed, at the beginning of Parshat Vaera, the heroic 4 Lashonot Geula, it's really 5 Lashonot Geula, V'hotzeiti, V'tzalti, V'galti, V'lakachti, V'haveti, this message delivered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he says to Moshe, go tell the people what I said, go tell them. Vayidaber Moshe Kain el Bnei Yisrael, and Moshe recited this dutifully to the Jewish people, V'lo shamu el Moshe, and they did not listen to Moshe, Mikotze ruach u'mi'avodah kasha. They could no longer hear anything Moshe had to say, because any visions that they had that someday they would be able to escape the misery of the moment were swept away by the reality of the first attempt by Moshe and Aaron, which was easily and handily rebuffed by the Pharaoh. And indeed, the workload increased. V'lo shamu Moshe, they did not hear Moshe, mikotze ruach, a shortness of spirit. Rashi describes this as quite literally shortness of breath, like a person who can't catch their breath, avodah kasha, from the hard work, the hard labor. According to Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, in his Sefer Emet Liyaakov, the Jewish people actually, based on the Medrash, the Jewish people had a source of hope that they clung to, quite literally clung to, week over week, when they had a day off of work. The day was Shabbos. And the documents they had in hand, these Megillot, scrolls, this is what the Medrash Rabbah describes in Shmot Rabbah, last week's Parsha, was what they could hold in hand and to look at those pages that described a world beyond the world that they were in. According to Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, this was the book of Eov that was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, trying to understand the challenge that they were in and why good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people, both the Tzadik V'Ralo V'Rasha V'Tovlo, as well as various chapters of Megillot from that would later be redacted into the Sefer of Tehillim that included within it the sections not only about Tzadik V'Ralo, but also about the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu and a hope for the future. The people now looked at these pages and found them to be empty. They said to Moshe Rabbeinu, what are we supposed to do now with these pages? Now that the Pharaoh has taken away from us our one day a week to be able to sit a little bit and to think about who we are as a people. You see, according to the Medrash, Val Yishu B'divrei Shaker, when Paro said that, and he said the people were lazy, it meant that he took away their day of rest. Now they no longer had the ability to assemble, even to think a little bit about who they were as Jews and as the Jewish people. Jews as individuals, relationship with Hashem, but further, what it meant to be part of a people that was on the journey, that was moving from slavery to freedom, from servitude to redemption, and indeed to be able to be Ovdei Hashem, servants of Hashem in Eretz Yisrael. All of this swept away, and suddenly the same lines, the same vision was now empty sloganeering. They could no longer believe in a vision of something positive in the future. They didn't even have the time to be able to put themselves back together. This too is a form of tirda, an individual who is in a state of inability to be able to think a little bit and to reflect. We daven this every single day in the prayer Uva L'Tzion, where we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'man lo niga larik, v'no lo neleid la behala, so that we shall not be laboring for emptiness, for something that is vacuous, and so that we shall not birth behala. Behala is a tumult, an inability to see anything from a moral clarity's perspective, moral clarity, or any ability even to see a sense of self. Everything is just the moment and its rush of events and a feeling of oppression that prevents an individual from looking ahead. Rav Yaakov Meidan wanted to understand, he's the Rosh Hashiva Shabbat Har Tzion, a little bit better why it is that here the people, we learn, were unable to hear the words of Moshe, and yet the very next pasuk is Hashem speaking to Moshe and saying to Moshe, okay, Bodaber el Paro melech Mitzrayim v'shalach b'nei Yisrael. So go talk to Paro and tell Paro it's time to take the Jewish people out of his land. Moshe says back to Hashem, the Jewish people don't listen to me. Why should Paro listen to me? V'ani aral sfatayim, my lips cannot even formulate what it is that I want to say. I won't have any words, any language. V'yidaber Hashem Moshe ve'el Aaron v'yitzavim el b'nei Yisrael ve'el Paro melech Mitzrayim lo'tzir b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. And then here again, God speaks to Moshe and Aaron. He commands them to the Jewish people, mission to the Jews, then to go to Paro. Then we have a long section of all sorts of names, genealogy, and then the Torah goes back again. V'yidaber Hashem Moshe limor, ani Hashem, daber el Paro melech Mitzrayim, et kol asher ani dover elecha. And Moshe says, I'm aral sfatayim. And again, Moshe is told to go. Why all this repetition? And why is it on the heels of Moshe being rebuffed by the Jewish people? And then sort of God responds twice by repeating the same idea to him several times over. Moshe says, okay, I'll go. Explains Rav Yaakov Meidan as follows. There is one view that the Jewish people were actually unable to hear anything Moshe was saying because they were downtrodden. They were beaten back not only by the servitude and the suffering and the losses within their families, but also now, as I mentioned from Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, they lost their ability even to right the ship, to think about who they were as a people. But there's another line of thought. The Mechilta says, the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira, if an individual will be told, you just had a child, they would celebrate. If they're being told, you're about to be freed, they should celebrate. What is the Kotze Ruach and the Avodah Kasha, says the Mechilta, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira and the Mechilta? It's that the Jewish people had already adopted a completely alien world view. The Jewish people were Ovdei Avodah Zarah in Mitzrayim. Their entire religious worldview was besotted by a world of pyramids, of a pantheon of gods. The Pharaoh is only part of that structure. And they know in the back of their minds that there's other idea, that there's only one God, but they are mired in their Avodah Zarah. And when Moshe Rabbeinu comes to speak to them, they're already saying, you know what? If our God, the God of our ancestors, is so powerful, how come he can't overpower any of the gods here? Now listen to this idea. You know that Hashem promised Avram Avinu that the Jewish people would be exiled for 400 years. And it said after 400 years, they'll come back to the land of Israel. Everybody knows that. That's the Brit Ben Abitarim. We also know that when the Jewish people sinned, the chet of the Meraglim, the sin of the spies, what happened to them? They were delayed by 40 years. An entire generation was wiped out, not in one fell swoop, but over time. And a younger generation was the generation that would merit entering the land. Says Rav Yaakov Meidan, did you ever notice that at the end of Parshat Bo, there's a very strange pasuk. The verse says the Jewish people were in Egypt for 430 years. Where does that 30 years come from? There are many different explanations. The Ramban writes in his commentary there in Parshat Bo that the Exodus was delayed, however much time it was meant to be, by 30 years. You know why? Because the generation was not ready to leave. Says Rav Yaakov Meidan, it is altogether possible, in fact likely, that when Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jewish people initially, he spoke to them. He told them they were going to leave. And they said, oh, that's very nice. Then he went to Paro. Paro threw him away. The work got harder. The people said, between two worldviews, we refuse to accept the worldview that we're getting out. Instead, we prefer the safety and security of an alien foreign culture that we have internalized and made our own, which included, yes, even avodah zarah. That's what we mean, the Jewish people on a very low spiritual level. And so they did not hear what Moshe had to say. They had a shortness of spirit, means they could not see that what they were stuck in on the 49th level of ritual impurity was the wrong way. Their whole worldview was that way. The avodah kasha refers to avodah zarah. And then between that pasuk and the next pasuk, 30 years go by. After 30 years of Moshe Rabbeinu repeating to them over and over and over again that Jewish history is a process, that it comes not with just bouquets of flowers and great moments of rescue, but sometimes with an arduous process with many fits and starts, and that it requires a certain repetition of the vision again and again. And for 30 years, Moshe Rabbeinu gave exactly the same drasha every single time. One day we'll get out of here. And therefore, after 30 years, Hashem says to him, okay, now go talk to Paro. Now go talk to Paro. Moshe says, I can't. What about the Jewish people? Hashem says, okay, you and Aaron rather, Vayetzavem el bnei Yisrael. The Mechilta writes, it means that Moshe and Aaron are being told, tell the Jewish people, rid yourselves of your foreign ideology, of your idolatry, and instead decide to accept this vision. It is now the year 2021. Where were you 30 years ago in 1991? How many events in the world have transpired that if someone in 1991 had said to you, these things will happen within the next 30 years, you would have waved your hand and said, there's no way. It's impossible. So many unfathomable things have happened in a 30-year span. Now retroject the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. For 30 years, the delay of the redemption had to happen because an entire generation was not really ready to accept that there could be a vision that was something better than the moment that they found themselves in. Whether it was because of the sense of being oppressed and being pushed and without an ability to actually catch one's breath, or whether it actually was because they had internalized foreign ideas and made them their own, of a whole foreign culture that was actually completely alien to a Jewish way of life. In either case, it needed more time in order to ferment, more time in order to become ripened, more time in order, perhaps, to wait for another generation that would be more ready and willing to change. We are living through a time of unbelievable stress. Who in the world today is not tarud, feeling that they don't know what's going to come next, and they have no idea what's going to be on so many different levels of life? But we do get a little taste of Olam Haba every single week for 25 hours. It's a fantastic opportunity for a Jew to just be able to catch their breath. The gift of Shabbos is one that I think for many of us, we've rediscovered even during the stresses of these last many months. Yehi Ratzon that we should be worthy in the weeks ahead, the days ahead, of being able to come out of this very challenging time that we're in on all levels and to have a sense of perspective. What a Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, tell Klal Yisrael, is still the message for us today. It's the message not only on Pesach, it's even the message Parshat Vaera. This too is part of Jewish history, and we are part of it as proud Jewish people. May we soon be zochim to hear about all of these 5 lashonot of Geula, of redemption, these 5 expressions of it coming to fruition, the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu, b'mheir b'yameinu, amen v'amen.